Welcome to the Think Christian podcast, where we talk about faith and popular culture because there's no such thing as secular. I'm Josh Larson, Josh 1 as far as I know, and I'm excited to talk about Mickey 17 on this episode. This is the latest film from director Bong Joon-Ho, and it's quite a different experience than his 2019 Best Picture Oscar winner, Parasite. While that was a precisely engineered thriller set in contemporary South Korea, Mickey 17 takes place within a futuristic science fiction setting, and it has the tone of a madcap comedy. Robert Pattinson stars as the title character, a laborer on an interplanetary mission in 2054 to colonize a faraway ice planet. Deep in debt and on the run from a loan shark, Mickey has signed up to work as an expendable, basically someone who is subjected to risky tasks that often result in death. Each time he's killed, a fresh version of his body is printed and Mickey's memories are uploaded into it, allowing him to get back to work. When we first meet Mickey, he's already died 16 times. So, issues of class are still at play here, but is Mickey 17 as effective as Parasite? J.R. Forasteros and Sarah Welch-Larson will join me to consider that question, as well as how the movie touches on notions like the imago Dei and religious hypocrisy. There's a lot going on in Mickey 17, even beyond all the Mickeys. Let's jump in. Okay, first off, you two, am I talking to the mild JR and Sarah or the habanero JR and Sarah?
We'll see. It's too early to tell, I think.
Oh, you're not going to reveal. Okay. Well, fair enough. Welcome to J.R. Forasteros and Sarah Welch-Larson. I don't know. We might have time to get into that Mickey 17 reference, but maybe we shouldn't spoil it. It's such a great line. I don't know if we want to spoil that one. Maybe it's not a great line, though. Folks have been divided on this movie. From what I can tell so far, it certainly has not received the sort of universal acclaim that greeted director Bong Joon-Ho's previous film, Parasite. And maybe this is where we should start with just general reactions. Where did you two fall on Mickey 17? This tale of a futuristic working stiff who gets spit out as a new version of himself every time he dies on the job. Sarah, you want to get us started?
I really enjoyed this movie. I liked it a lot. I thought it was really funny and engaging, and it's got a lot of ideas on its mind. And even though not all of them necessarily go to all of the places that the movie is hinting at in the beginning, I like watching a movie make a lot of big swings. And I also really like it when movies do things like reference Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind for whatever reason, like that shows up in there. It also made me think a little bit about Phil Tippett's Mad God to a certain extent. It's a movie that's got a lot going on, and it gives us Robert Pattinson playing not one, but two weird little guys. And I, for one, am always here for a Robert Pattinson weird little guy.
Yeah, double the Pattinson is never a bad thing. How about you, JR? Favorable or not?
Yeah, I think I had seen a couple of middling reviews on it. And so I went in with my expectations a little bit tempered, and I had a blast.
Yes.
I'm going to compare this book to a novel that I really adore later in the podcast. Spoilers. And I just think that the movie had so many big ideas in it that it didn't get to explore fully, but I don't know that that's necessarily a dig because it used those ideas to tell a really fun story that had some good character stuff at the heart of it that really worked for me. So nice. I had a lot of fun with this movie. I'd like to watch it again. Will not be the first or the last on this podcast to sing the praises of Robert Pattinson. And yeah, I even liked whatever Mark Ruffalo was doing.
We'll get
I don't
into
know
that.
why. I don't know why he's become the go-to guy for weird, big, broad scenery chewing, but between Poor Things and this, like, he is making some choices these days that, again, I'm just along for the ride, Mark. I'll follow you where you want to take me, you know? So.
Indeed. Yeah, can't wait to return to his performance. As you mentioned, JR, this is based on a book by Edward Ashton, just a couple years old, I believe. Bong Joon-Ho did write the screenplay adaptation, and okay, not a lot of debate here. We're 3 for 3. I'm a big fan of this movie. movie.
Yes.
I recognize it's no Parasite. I have it ranked somewhere in the middle of my Bong Joon-Ho rankings, and it definitely falls as I took this chance to catch up with his other movies I haven't seen. He has these big swing, largely English language sci-fi set comedies. I'm thinking of Okja as well. And yeah, this one for sure. And then he has these more character-driven, I would say, explorations of the depravity of humanity, which Parasite falls into, and then an early work like Memories of Murder and something like Mother. So I tend to find those more introspective, though they are darkly funny, and generally Korean set films to be stronger. I'll admit, you both have hinted at not everything pans out in Mickey 17. I would say that is definitely the case. Snowpiercer, I should have mentioned too, as one of his English language madcap science fiction. I don't think everything panned out there either. But in this one, man, I had so much fun, even though I recognize that it wasn't maybe able to corral everything it wanted to do. So much it did have to do with Pattinson's performance. And yes, these ideas that it explores are all topical, are all very timely and prescient in some ways. And yeah, got me thinking about things. And at the same time, I was having a blast. I couldn't ask for much more than that, unless I guess I'm asking for Parasite.
Which, I mean, in defense of the madcap, it's really refreshing to watch a movie with so much on its mind, with such heavy, deep, really dark themes on its mind, also be really funny and recognize just how ridiculous some of this is too. Like, I think that one of the things that won me over was that there's this incredible disparity of tone. And I like that. That's actually kind of a hallmark of a lot of Korean and cinema and K-dramas especially. So I see people complaining about that and I'm like, that's kind of what he does. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the oeuvre that he's working in here. And I don't know, it's nice to be able to laugh and not feel guilty about laughing about something that is just so deeply dark. I like that he's able to mine the humor out of the situation. It's a lot more enjoyable to watch, and it doesn't feel like you're being beat over the head with an actual sledgehammer. Maybe it's more of a cartoon sledgehammer, possibly.
Yes, I think that's very apt. I do think that this is one of the things Mickey 17 is exploring is related to Parasite. It's deeply concerned with class, as a lot of Bong Joon-Ho's films are. And I was thinking of you, Sarah, when I heard what this movie was about, but then it really digs into it as it unfolds. And not just Mickey, but there are other exploited laborers on this interplanetary expedition. And you are a scholar of the Alien film series, the author of Becoming Alien, as a matter of fact. So I was really curious to hear if you saw any parallels between how class is explored in the Alien films and maybe here in Mickey 17.
It's funny because the movie did make me think of the theologian whose work I engage with in my book about Alien. Her name's Dr. Catherine Keller, and she's written a handful of books. The one that I deal with the most within the Alien series has to do with this idea of interrelationships and sin being a denial of the interrelatedness of human beings and everything else. If you deny what the world has been created to be, if you deny what other people have been created to be, if you dehumanize them, then that's ultimately sin because you're denying the work of God in putting all of those things into relationship with each other. And Mickey 17 deals a lot with this idea of this character who has become, literally his job title is expendable. He's given all of the worst jobs purely because if he dies, they'll just print out another one. Like, life becomes cheap and death becomes cheap. And even to himself, to a certain extent, he's also thinking about himself as being a little bit less than. Like, he's the one who first claims that title of expendable. He offers himself up to be part of that job. And later on down the line, after he's somewhere in the teens, at one point, he expects to die and he's expecting to be eaten by something else. And that doesn't happen. And the line that he says is, "I'm perfectly good meat. Feel free to eat me." Like, he is completely
like he's almost
given
mad. Like he's almost offended that,
This has become his purpose.
Exactly. And his purpose is to just die and then be reborn again and live a really crummy life while he's at it. So I was thinking a little bit about Keller's ideas about interrelatedness. I actually didn't make the blue-collar alien connection necessarily, but I think that was partly because I was thinking a little bit about the mechanism by which Mickey gets reprinted over and over again. He's basically built out of these reclaimed materials from the ship, which makes sense. If you're on a spaceship, you probably want to recycle as much as you possibly can rather than scattering it out into space. And that was the connection to Phil Tippett's Mad God is there are these expendable
Ah,
beings within the movie who are literally stamped out of the leavings of other greater beings that they can't even possibly fathom. And then they get reused over and over again and then restamped out into more. And they only exist in order to labor and then be killed by other monsters as well. So I was thinking about that a lot. I have no idea if it's a purposeful reference, but I enjoyed the connection.
and Mad God, a bewildering stop motion
hmm
creation that, yeah, I was able to catch when it came out. It's unlike anything else I've ever seen, but I think it's right to make a connection to what's going on here. You're talking about how Mickey is regenerated. It is this organic material that's
hmm
been expelled on this ship. And so your imagination can tell you what Mickey is ultimately made of, these other versions of him.
And
Yeah.
Mad God, to be fair, is also one of the most upsetting movies I've ever seen. I think it's incredible, but
Yeah,
it's not for the faint of heart. Mickey 17 is working in a much different register here because it's not all pure horror the entire time. Like you're able to laugh at this situation a lot too.
for sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
What'd you make of sort of the class ideas explored here, JR?
You've already mentioned that it's nothing new for Bong Joon-Ho. Like Snowpiercer does that. Parasite did it very well. And I think what I was really captivated by was the way that resurrection in this case actually gets co-opted by the powers to serve the powers. Whereas when we speak about Jesus' resurrection, when the New Testament writers certainly wrote about Jesus' resurrection, it was this disruption to the empire's ability to control life and death. And so then the way that they turn this ability to not die, right? To come back from trauma, to overcome these things, even assumedly to be reborn without scars if they wanted to, right? This is all taken away and then now put in service of the empire. So now literally someone cannot die. As long as they have the brick and the printer, Mickey is forever in servitude. It's this like terrifying inversion of the promise of resurrection and the power of resurrection, and this like warning about what happens when we value human life this way, which is a literal thing, right? Like Mickey sells himself into expendableness because he's in debt to a loan shark. I think the least believable thing in the movie to me was that in this not terribly distant future where we've ruined the planet and there's people trying to get away, that he's the only person who would be willing to sell himself. You know, I
hmm
think about people
Sure.
who are in crushing medical debt or student loan debt or those kinds of things. Like loan shark, sure, man, I guess whatever. But like, I think that there are a lot of people that our culture has put a price on their life and it's lower than what they feel like they can pay. You
Yeah.
know? Yeah, Sarah, I think you said it well, right? This is a deeply disturbing movie that was somehow just a blast to watch.
Well, I don't know, JR. You just made it a lot more disturbing with that, which I hadn't
Oh,
considered.
sorry.
But you're right, though. Like this movie turns a very hopeful idea, the idea of the resurrection, into a curse. And that's chilling. I mean, it handles that comedically, but it's still at the root very, very disturbing. And, you know, I was thinking of this in terms of the imago Dei, which we've sort of touched on, this idea that we're made in the image of God and how the class issues come into play there, and being laborers, because, you know, we're not just made for work. None of us are made simply for work. That wasn't the idea in the Garden of Eden. Humankind was charged to be caretakers, right? But that's very different than being laborers. And the biblical account, difficult labor comes in with the curse of the fall. After humanity's cast out of the garden for choosing our own way over God's, you know, then part of the curse is toil and labor. And, you know, a movie like this makes me think about and realize that we make that curse worse whenever we divide labor unfairly or abusively, and we're just kind of compounding it. And that is certainly what we see here. I think Mickey is the ultimate example. And to what you're saying, JR, yes, his supposed resurrections are not hopeful at all. How about the recurring gag? And here's where the comedy comes in. The recurring gag of his new body coming out of the printer, right? This roller, it's like a TSA conveyor belt. And the thing where I laughed out loud and then caught it in my throat, when the scientists, you know, these top level scientists haven't bothered to put a gurney at the end of the printer. So Mickey's like limp, goopy body comes out of it and just sort of falls onto the ground like a dead fish. And it's a sight gag, but it's horrible. And I think it connects a lot of what we've just been talking about.
It's like a paper jam almost. Like he kind of stops and comes back in and then stops and comes back in and then flops on the floor like so much empty paper too.
A
Yeah.
Mickey paper jam, yes.
really, really funny.
Josh, you mentioned labor in the garden, right? And one of the things I think is so important about those stories there at the beginning of Genesis is that the end goal of creation is the seventh day. You know, I get irritated when people call themselves 6-day creationists. I'm like, it's 7 days. Like the work isn't finished until the Sabbath day. Like all of this other work is being done so that then we can all flourish together and live together in harmony. And that's why in Judaism, the seventh day, the Saturday, you know, the Sabbath day is a day where you're supposed to work really hard to not have to work hard on the Sabbath, you know? So you make sure everything's done, you make sure you have all your food. And I think you're right, Josh. Like we've organized our society to the place where we often cannot afford, quote unquote, to take a break. We keep talking about how fun this movie is, and then we only talk about things that horrified us. But there you go. One of the things that horrified me was when, you know, has already fallen through the ice. Then we go back and kind of work back up to that. So it's right before he falls through the ice, and he's talking about how he's on like his double patrols or something like that, and it's just him alone in the snow. And we get the sense that again, he is not valuable, so they don't waste extra food on him and they work him as much as they want. And I think treating someone like that is a distinctly anti-Christian thing. Picturing it is not anti-Christian, but like I think treating someone who bears God's image as simply a source of labor, when what image bearing means is to live together in harmony where we all flourish together in this Sabbath community, is really what should be happening. And they literally label him something to remove him from the sacred community, right? He's expendable. He doesn't matter. He's
take away his last name and give him a number. Yeah.
There's something kind of striking too, I think, about the fact that he's literally like the ultimate renewable resource, and that makes him even cheaper for whatever reason. Like, I guess it's like a law of supply and demand thing, but that's also kind of terrifying because then you're talking about an actual human being that way. And yet it's still apparent throughout the course of the movie that every single iteration of him is slightly different. So there is a different viewpoint on perhaps the same personality, but one of them's whiny, one of them's spicy, one of them's a lot more meek, almost as though the different versions or printings have kind of shifted or changed the image over time as it's been copied, but every single one of them is still their own unique and distinct personality. And the people around Mickey don't seem to value him for that, but the movie sure does. And the movie sure appreciates him as a human being. And I like that distinction that director Bong makes when he's telling this particular story.
And I think that's where Pattinson's performance comes in too, because it's very slapsticky. He has this goofy voiceover, you know, sort of a dim-witted nasal patter he uses, but he's one of our best actors working, I think. And so he's going to give you way more than that. So underneath are the levels of humanity. And to your point, Sarah, varying expressions of humanity when he is these different versions of Mickey. That's what makes it such an incredible performance, I think. So we're in the midst of Lent, and I happened to see Mickey 17 just a few days after Ash Wednesday. And it struck me as something of an Ash Wednesday movie. We've already touched on some of these things, right? We confront our mortality during this season, and this is something Mickey does directly more than a dozen times. But also, there are at least, I think, 3 occasions where a character bluntly asks him, what's it like to die? And watching this, I don't know if it came to mind the season we're in, how Mickey 17 might function as a Lenten movie.
I think it's illustrative of not observing Lent, the way that these characters have that attitude towards death. It kind of goes back to this idea of he's a renewable resource, so he's cheap, right? So the idea of Mickey being able to die and come back and die and come back is almost more of a novelty to everybody else. They don't understand just how deep a question they're asking of him. And it's clear that he doesn't want to answer that question. He's not interested in answering that question because he knows that if he answers it, he'll either get laughed at or he'll be laughed off, or nobody's really going to take him truly seriously. And when they finally do, it definitely lands with a pretty heavy impact, I think. But I think it also speaks to the culture of the people on the ship who are incapable of recognizing, 1, Mickey's humanity, and 2, his own fears and concerns, and the fact that he has to go through this whole ordeal that none of them are going to be able to ever come out the other side of. And they just kind of treat him like a curiosity rather than with the reverence that probably deserves.
Yeah, they disregard not just his safety or even his livelihood, but there is that other level, the psychological level. They don't even register those fears he might have, which he does speak to on occasion, that each time this happens for him, it's terrifying. But that's not something that comes into the calculus of his employers.
There's a great line at one point in a flashback when human beings on Earth are kind of debating the merits and drawbacks of this technology. And one person stands up in whatever the congressional hearing that they're having is, as though they're going to say something, big and important and brave. And they ask, how can we use this for human economic improvement? Like they immediately just jump to the monetary value of this thing rather than thinking about, well, what are the actual horrifying consequences of you're printing somebody out and sort of recycling their souls effectively.
Jared, do you have any thoughts about Lent and Mickey 17?
Yeah, so I don't think this counts as a spoiler because it's in all the trailers, but there's a point at which everyone thinks Mickey 17 is dead, and so they go ahead and print Mickey 18, and then it turns out Mickey 17 is not dead. And the protocol for this is that if multiples happen, that all of the copies and the backup brick with their brain in it, everything has to be destroyed. And so there's a conversation not long after that happens in the film where Mickey 17 is trying to explain to Mickey 18, because Mickey 18's like, we'll just kill you. I've already been made. We fixed the glitch, right? We don't have to tell anyone. Everything goes on. And Mickey 17 explains that now that there is a Mickey 18, 17 doesn't come back anymore, right? Now 17 is mortal because 18 is the one who's going to be backed up and copied and all of that. So for the first time, he now has the existential despair of the grave again. Right? Whereas in all of these other times, yes, it's painful. Yes, it's horrible. Yes, it's awful in the physical way, but there is a sense in which his soul or whatever will persist. And now he is facing the reality once again of death. And I think for me, that was where it landed as a Lenten film, because many brilliant theologians and philosophers have argued that most of human civilization is about us trying to defy death. And that's why we build monuments and have children and pass on legacies and write books and all the things, is because we are trying to escape our own finitude. And Lent is the space where we're meant to surrender to that and say, we come from dust and we return to dust. And it's only through the hope of genuine resurrection, not resurrection in service to the state, that we find true liberation. And it's only by dying with Christ that we find anything meaningful in this life or the next. I was, again, really moved in that moment because Bong Joon-Ho just does this so often in his films. It's such an obvious insight once it's been spoken, but it hit me out of nowhere like a ton of bricks. And again, it took a scrap of dialogue and wow, all of a sudden, like the stakes are completely redefined for the rest of the film. And it makes certain things that happen at the end really powerful. I found it really, really profound.
It feels like you're watching someone realize that they're human again after having not really accepted the fact that they are human, or having ignored the fact that they're human for however many years beforehand as well. It's a pretty devastating moment.
So we're touching on some heavy stuff. Let's get to the comedy. Probably the broadest comic performance is Mark Ruffalo's Kenneth Marshall. He's presented as this failed politician who is reinventing himself as this entrepreneur space explorer. He's overseeing this expedition. He's basically convinced his most fervent followers to join him to establish this better human society on another planet. And,
pure.
Of course, pure, right?
Yeah.
Built on the backs of people impure, like Mickey. One fascinating quality of this character, and maybe this is drawn from the book, I don't know, but it didn't necessarily need this element, but I do think it speaks to our current moment, is that Marshall manipulates religion to consolidate power. I think of the speech he gives. This is a flashback back to when this whole idea of expendables and multiples is being debated in the public forums. And he's giving this speech where he's decrying something as the work of Satan, I think he says. But then he flashes like the horns of the devil kind of behind his back. So he's like, suggesting he's not really serious about what he's saying. And how about this bizarre comic scene where he and his wife, played by Toni Collette, they're hosting Mickey and another employee, another worker, for this lavish dinner in their suite. They're basically trying to sell them on something to convince her. They launch into this, what I found very insincere prayer, and then something like a praise song. So, this was fascinating to me that Marshall had this element. What did you guys make of this Marshall figure?
I don't know if I can endure 4 more years of heavy-handed Trump allegories.
Okay.
His followers wear red hats. It's not subtle. I think even a lot of Ruffalo's delivery were cribbing from some of President Trump's stuff. Again, like I said, I enjoy Mark Ruffalo going broad, swinging for the fences. Like, it's strong choices, and I think he's charismatic enough to pull it off. I don't know that part of the religious stuff worked for me personally, but it's also like no less silly than a lot of what we're seeing a lot of the Christian nationalist politicians doing in our country. Like, they're doing equally silly and outrageous things. So it's hard to critique the film film for doing things that are not that far removed from what we see in real life. So
It sounds like maybe there's less bite for you because it's not surprising or revealing in any way, perhaps.
yeah, maybe. I will say the part of it that did work for me was that it seemed to begin from a sincere place when the other dinner guest, the crewman who had lost her possibly girlfriend, I think it's implied, Jennifer, that gets killed, starts to pray, but she prays to Jennifer. And like, again, it's clear she doesn't really know what she's doing. And then Kenneth gets the elbow from his wife to say like, hey, fill in the awkward space. That's when he starts to do that. That
Which is
part
back to
worked.
the manipulation of belief or the manipulation of faith for other purposes.
But then, yeah, like, I don't know, the choice to go so broad there with the singing and stuff. And then there's another scene later where the Mickeys are watching. I guess he has like a nightly late show format
talk show
you're
on
right,
his
like
spaceship.
thing.
I mean,
Yeah,
that
and
tracks too, right? That you could totally see that happening.
But he's also doing like the singing stuff there too.
I got a 700 Club vibe from that, honestly. So,
Yes,
like,
very much.
There's
very
there's
much.
definitely some Trump in there. There's definitely some Elon Musk in there.
Yeah, that's
but
what I was going to say for sure.
there's also a decent amount of like televangelist kind of
that's good.
stuff
I didn't
in
think
there
of
too.
that.
And that was what worked for me, I think, but maybe that was just the like rueful laugh of recognition more than anything else. And maybe that's because I'm a little bit more generationally distanced from that particular
It's not
expression.
so tender for you.
I mean, it's still painful, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, I think that that specific flavor of Christianity has a lot to answer for. And I think that this movie is touching on it, maybe poking at it a little bit, and it kind of feels a little bit like poking a bruise. Some of it felt sharper than others. And I think the stuff that worked for me was definitely the more personal interrelationship stuff rather than the exploration of here's how religion is used to manipulate people.
Yeah, I think that's what was missing for me is we're seeing them do these performances, but we're not actually watching how this religious rhetoric enables the people on the ship to continue to perpetuate the injustices they do on people like Mickey. Right.
Okay.
And like, that's to me the gap that was missing. It's like, yes, we can all point at clowns and cartoon characters that do silly, stupid stuff. But the real harm, and I think where the satire really helps, is when you show how that shapes behavior of the people and again enables classism, enables racism, enables discrimination, baptizes those things, sanctifies those things in the name of this stuff. And yeah, maybe that's what was missing for me, was it just felt like cartoon characters. And again, we've all seen televangelists, we've all seen all that stuff. It didn't work for me. So that's probably why.
Although on the same side, I mean, I think it is kind of obvious that they are enabling it because there are a lot of people who go out and treat Mickey as like, oh, what's it like to die? Or, oh, hey, Mickey, are you dead yet? Like that kind of question, I think, is also something where like that's just kind of the waters that they swim in. And so maybe it felt like it was an obvious enough connection that they didn't need to draw that connection. Possibly. I'm not sure. The other thing about this particular character and then also the Toni Collette character too is that they're so obsessed with these kind of empty big symbols that there may honestly not be all that much there. She's obsessed with sauce as like the ultimate expression of civilization.
Right. Yeah.
And I did see the writer Jaya Saxena, I think, on Blue Sky mentioned something along the lines of like, that's actually kind of a cutting piece because sauce can often be used as like a gatekeepy. You're using this as a way to show that your cuisine is more elevated than other cuisines, which is part of the reason why we think of French cuisine as being like the greatest of all time versus a burger maybe doesn't have like a sophisticated flavor profile because there isn't as much of a specific kind of sauce on it. Never mind that there's ketchup and mustard, but there you go. And her whole thing is that she's just interested in blending up one ingredient and calling it a sauce.
Killed me.
Very
Killed
funny.
me. Yes.
And then also, I think the giant rock that they pull in as a symbol of this is going to be the brand new world that we build, and we're going to build it on this perfect rock, which turns out to be a little bit less than perfect in everybody's eyes. But it's just this one big, dumb, empty symbol that kind of sums up everything that they're all about, too.
Yeah, and the sauce thing and the cuisine thing speaks to this other complete thread that Bong Joon-Ho has been interested in before, which is like animal cruelty, and eating meat is a thread in this movie. So there are a lot of directions this movie tries to go, and maybe it just gets distracted at some point, even though it's well over 2 hours. Is there anything else, maybe one of those threads we haven't brought up that you guys want to make make sure we touch on, or anything else about the movie? JR, you had mentioned something about the book that you wanted to get to.
So I have not read this book, but there is another book by Mur Lafferty called 6 Wakes, and it's a very similar future where cloning has been legalized but very strictly regulated. And so, very briefly, it's a locked room murder mystery where there are 6 people on a spaceship. They all wake up in their clone bodies, which means all of them have been killed, and they all have their most recent memory backup as a week ago when they left the station, but they've been on the ship for 2.5 years. And it's like one of them has to have done it, but even the person who did it doesn't remember doing it.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay. And so the reason I bring it up is because of literally the first page of the book is the 10 laws of cloning that were passed. And all of that ends up like shaping the whole plot. It's an incredible book. As soon as I saw like the beginning of Mickey 17, I was like, oh, 6 Wakes. It feels like 6 Wakes could also take place in this universe, just like it's another story in another pocket of the universe, right?
Yeah.
So if this scratched an itch for you and you like those kinds of deep philosophical questions that Mickey 17 was asking after, you definitely should check out 6 Wakes by Mur Lafferty. It will do a lot of similar kinds of stuff. And if you like, murder mysteries, right? So
very nice. Thank you for
adding
that.
To the reading list, yeah.
Anything else, Sarah, you wanted to get to? You mentioned the Miyazaki touch, which I loved. This is not a spoiler, but we meet these hairy giant pill bugs on the ice planet. The creature design is incredible, I think. And I mean, we could go into another conversation about creation care. And,
oh my gosh.
With that element. I really thought that was one of the stronger elements of the movie that they followed through on, but it just gives you another sense of how many directions Mickey 17 is going.
It's going in so many, and those creatures look almost exactly, especially in profile and in silhouette, like the monstrous bugs, the Ohm from Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. So much so that there's a moment in the movie where I was like, this is just the climax of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. And I was here for it. Like, it worked for me. I think there were enough similarities that it seemed like it was a pretty intentional choice on Bong's part. There's one moment where, actually, no, let's not talk about it.
Too spoilery? Too spoilery?
I think too spoilery, honestly.
Fair enough. I think listeners will be grateful for that, especially if they haven't seen Mickey 17. I hope we've convinced them to give it a try. Despite some of the hesitation we had, we are all fans, it sounds like. So thank you both for joining me. And, JR, I know you've been traveling, so maybe not any other recent podcasts or writing of yours out there right now, but is there anything you want to point folks to?
At my newsletter, I'm publishing some stuff on my trip to Peru. So I'm writing about Machu Picchu, I'm writing about the floating islands of Lake Titicaca, and I'm doing some reflection on how cultures change and what that might mean for discipleship and church in the coming years, based on some of my reflections with some of the Peruvians I met and talking with them about how they navigate their ancestry being both, indigenous and colonizer, and what that means to be in a country that's just both, and you can't pull them apart.
Yeah. Where can
so
folks
I'm
find
doing that on my Substack newsletter, so it's just at JR Foresteros at Substack. So I'm doing some of that. If you want to look at my vacation slides, that's what I've been calling them. So.
Sounds great to me. Sarah, I know you and Kevin McLenithan are always busy with the Seeing and Believing newsletter. Anything there or elsewhere you want to highlight?
So as of us recording, I think this week we'll have a written review of Mickey 17 and possibly also of Steven Soderbergh's new Black Bag.
Oh, so good.
I enjoyed it so much. I'm also going to be shortly on the Fear of God podcast, talking about one of my favorite movies from last year, The Vortilac, which is a French vampire movie, speaking of French cuisine, and a movie that I enjoyed very much. So I'm looking forward to that conversation quite a bit too.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again. Yeah, go ahead, Jer.
You're doing an Ebert Interruptus over Wizard of Oz. Is that what I saw?
This is true. Yeah. April 7 to 10. It's the annual trip to the Conference on World Affairs. And they asked me to do Wizard of Oz. Usually they just let me pick whatever movie we do, but they are having Cynthia Erivo for the keynote speaker for the conference. So they're like, hey, it'd be kind of cool if you tied Ebert Interruptus into that. And yeah, for folks who don't know, Roger Ebert started this in 1975, this tradition. We watch a movie day one and then spend 3 days going through it as a group. Anyone can stop it, ask a question, make a comment, and we try to get to the end in 3 days. So I've been able to do it for the last number of years and can't wait to do The Wizard of Oz. I just did a deep dive on The Wizard of Oz last fall, I think it was, over on Film Spotting. We did, a retro review of that, and shocker, it holds up. So I think
real banger of a movie, as it turns out.
Yeah. All those generations, they were onto something. So yeah, looking forward to that. But thanks again, you two. We'll talk again on some other subject down the road, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
If you're looking for more thoughts on the work of Bong Joon-Ho from Think Christian, Joe George has an article over on the website about Parasite, that Best Picture Oscar winner. He discusses the film as a parable on who is the least of these. Also on the TC website, and speaking of movies that touch on themes of Lent and Ash Wednesday, like Mickey 17, Abiel Chessie has an article highlighting 5 Lenten films, including a few surprising titles. I'm not going to spoil any of those here. You're just going to have to search 5 films for Lent over at thinkchristian.net. And if you're more of a video person, we do have a short summary video of her article over on the Think Christian YouTube channel. We'll also link to all of this in the show notes for this episode. There's a lot of good stuff on our YouTube channel, so please do check that out if you haven't already. And hello to those of you who are watching us there right now. As for our articles, you can be sure to not miss any of those by signing up to receive our emails at thinkchristian.net/subscribe. The TC Podcast is a listener and donor supported production of Reframe Ministries. You can learn more at reframeministries.org. Our audio engineer and post-production supervisor is John Reeder. I'm Josh Larson. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to consider how another corner of our pop culture fandom connects with our faith.